Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Ghosts and Spirits video. I haven't done one of these in a while when it comes to just straight up talking about a particular subject as opposed to doing some live streams and so on. So I thought I would bring this back here and then that way focus on a topic that I've actually talked about in the past. This is a location that I've been to several times and I've chronicled, I believe, 2 videos on this, but they were very brief ones. It was pretty much just me walking through the location, providing some brief history here and there. This one actually has to do with the actual subject matter itself in full, the history associated with it, and as always, I'll give my thoughts and opinions on it. It has to do with the ghosts of the Comanche Lookout Tower, which you're looking at here. So again, those of you familiar with my channel, you might have seen this chronicled before, but this time you'll get to have the full experience associated with it. So let's go ahead and let's talk about it here, and then that way I'll be able to, again, give my own thoughts and opinions. This is a great place if you're in San Antonio, by the way, to be able to visit it on your own. Very easy to get into, and then who knows, you might just have a haunting experience as well. So again, let's go ahead and let's talk about this, which are the ghosts of the Comanche Lookout Tower. So first off, what is the Comanche Lookout Tower? Well, it's a location, a tower, if you will, that's 4 stories tall, that's located there in Comanche Lookout Park, which is on Comanche Hill, there in San Antonio. In fact, the exact address, if you ever wanted to go to it, is 15551 Nacogdoches Road, San Antonio, Texas, 78247. So again, I've been there in the past. It's 96 acres. I've obviously not gone through the entire 96 acres, just enough to essentially be able to go find the tower itself, but it is remarkably large. In fact, whenever you walk in on your own, you'll see essentially that it's almost like traveling back in time. There's the robust area of San Antonio surrounding it, and then when you're in the actual trails, when you're actually in the park itself, you're surrounded by nothing but forestry in of itself. But that's essentially where it's located and where you can find these ghosts. First off, though, the history associated with this Comanche Lookout Tower has to do with the location itself, which apparently goes back a long time. So even as far back as 9500 BC, can you believe that? 9500 BC, it was roamed there by Paleo Indians. They've been there for that long. And in fact, if you go towards the 1700s and 1800s, that's when eventually the Comanche Indians started to utilize that spot right there to be able to use as a location both for a meeting place, a lookout, and then also for hunting as well. This was a hill that became prominent, not just for them, but also on people that were traveling there as well. In fact, at a certain point, eventually Spanish colonists began traveling to that location. They were using it as a way to get from point A to point B. In fact, actually heading more towards Bastrop and in San Antonio as well. And because of the size of this hill, which again, if you walk it like I have, if you've gone all the way up to the actual tower itself, it does go up pretty high. Not too high, but obviously not street level either. Whenever you're up there, you can look about and actually see pretty far away. That's why this location was a good spot for the Comanche Indians for hunting, because they got to use it to essentially see their gaming prey from who knows how far along. But also again, they eventually was shown to them as a way to attack anyone that was traveling by, whoever these settlers were, whoever these Spanish colonists were, and in some cases even the military themselves. They were able to use it as a vantage point to ambush them from many far miles away. In fact, it was said that they could see them coming from hours away before those travelers or anyone else even arrived, and then that way they could just ambush them right there. And in fact, if you wanted to get into a little bit more detail about it, the bottom of the hill, the base of the hill, is right there by Nacogdoches Road, which is the road that exists right now, the street road, in other words, where cars drive by. That is the location where many of those ambushes were done, and apparently they were done for quite some time. In fact, this place became known for having significant bloodshed between the travelers, the military, settlers, whomever, and then the Comanche Indians themselves. So who knows how many lost souls were essentially killed there within that location. Enough so that again it became known as a significant bloodshed site, and then eventually all the ghosts that ended up roaming around that location because of it too. So later on, actually more towards the 1800s, that's when eventually the place was bought up by some various owners. In fact, it went through several of them. It looks like at that time there was a good number of owners switching from one person to another. There was one that was a lawyer, there was another one that was a surveyor, there was another one that was just, I guess, an owner for just a very short time period. Where things take a different turn, though, is you'd have to go towards 1923. That's when a retired U.S. Army colonel by the name of Edward Cuppock eventually became owner of that property. He had served for 44 years in wars and his service in the military, and then eventually he just ended up owning that spot there. In fact, by that point, it was about 1,400 acres or so that he ended up owning. And then at that point, he also was a history aficionado and somebody who has spent so much time in Europe that he decided to mimic several of the castles that were there. So now the actual Comanche Lookout Tower, the one that you've been seeing here with regards to the haunted location, that was constructed by him. That started with him. He wanted to build it as a starting point, and then actually him and his two sons, one by the name of Edward Jr., another one with initials ES, would use that location and that time to eventually, or at least their intention was to make it into a sprawling complex. So they would start first with that four-story tower, and then who knows how far it was going to go, but they were eventually going to build a very large complex there. But then it stopped. It stopped essentially whenever the gentleman, Mr. Kopak, eventually ended up dying. Yeah, he ended up dying, and then when that happened, the construction of everything surrounding it was essentially stopped. But they did get some good over the next 25 years or so, some good construction done. In fact, they developed a stone lodge, they had some outbuildings, they had a very large 2,500 gallon water tower that was also built as well. They had homes there that were built, a tennis court, picnic tables, barbecue pit. They had all that stuff that was built there. But again, he ended up dying in 1948, and then eventually his own sons, who took over the property, I don't know how far they got in terms of building things more, but they also essentially stopped too. So, for lack of a better term, once everything was finalized, at least with the lookout tower, the rest of it was still there, but it was not. It was just halted and halfway done. But ultimately, it was 100% stopped in 1968 when once again this land was sold to another developer. What had ended up happening though was almost tragically that new developer, that new owner, started removing many of those structures that Colonel Kapak had placed within that location. Everything that I was mentioning earlier was essentially removed. I don't know why he was doing this. I guess there were probably plans to develop something else completely new and probably taking up the majority of that space there. But they removed all of it, but the actual tower itself, the tower still stayed intact. In fact, obviously, it's still there today. And so, for whatever reason, that owner removed everything. And then, for whatever reason, they decided to leave that tower as well. And then they just left it as is. Once again, the place there just continued to switch hands back and forth, back and forth. But ultimately, in the 90s, the 1990s, that's when it ended up becoming property of the U.S. government's Resolution Trust Corporation. And then there was a group that was called the Save Comanche Lookout Group, who also ended up making sure that that location would finally have a final resting place. They would use that along with some loans, along with some bonds to keep it as is, and then eventually became the historical site that you see today. So ever since that time period in the 1990s, that's when essentially the park or the Comanche Lookout Tower became the Comanche Lookout Park, and then it is as is today. So again, you can go there to this very day, walk about it. I get the sense that a lot of people there in San Antonio use it as a place of exercise, just to walk about or to run as well. The brief time that I was there, I did see many a good number of people walking about, but there were many trails to do so. So you would see some people there, but then you wouldn't. You would be by yourself for quite some time just because of how large it is. So you can definitely be there and then also be around people, but then be by yourself at certain points as well. Now, as far as the ghostly activity, there is plenty. There's lots to talk about. So this is essentially what's happened ever since the location again became a lookout for the Comanche Indians, and ever since all those settlers, travelers, civilians, and then also those in the military, ever since all of them ended up basically coming together at that point, all that bloodshed I was mentioning earlier ended up becoming a location of many ghosts. In fact, it's been reported that there's multiple ghosts that are there to this day. There's the cry of ghosts wailing, essentially those that were ambushed and those that were killed on the spot. There's also the hollering of Comanche Indians. You can apparently hear them right there within that location, as if again they're about to go on an ambush of sorts, and you don't see them, at least not yet. More on that here in a moment, but you can still hear them going about. And then also there's apparently the sounds of people moving, as if they're settlers, as if they're moving about, as if it was just a normal day for them. But again, you don't see or hear, I'm sorry, you don't see anything or feel anything, but you can definitely hear something like that. Where things take an interesting turn though is that apparently there are full blown apparitions as well. In fact, one of them is Colonel Kopuk himself. Apparently, people have stated seeing the specter of an old man as he's pushing a wheelbarrow, one that's filled with rocks, back and forth from point A to point B, there with by the lookout tower. So this is him. This is apparently Colonel Kopuk, and he's there just doing his job as if he was still building that tower, building the surrounding area from scratch. Apparently, he doesn't like it when people are around the tower. So if you wanted to have a chance to, I guess, bring him out, that's essentially by being near the tower. He really doesn't like it either, and I don't recommend this at all. Putting this caveat out there, not recommending it, but he really doesn't like it when you vandalize the tower or go inside the tower. In fact, as you can see, there's a gate now, and apparently those areas are cordoned off too, and that's to prevent people from going inside, because apparently over the years there's been parties that have been thrown in there. I remember reading somewhere that there was homeless that would also use that as a location to stay in too, and then there would just be just rowdy people that would go there and vandalize it, straight up vandalize the tower, and he did not like that. So he's known to make his presence known whenever that occurs, because he's just as apparently passionate about the tower after his life ended as he was before his life ended. And then, if you wanted to hear about more ghostly apparitions, there was apparently a pretty haunting one that occurred to a woman who was someone that was just there taking her dog for a walk. Apparently, she was doing it for quite some time. Like, this is, like I mentioned a minute ago, a place for people to just do it naturally there in San Antonio. I got the impression that the woman was doing this as well, that she does this periodically. She was stating that she was walking her dog up towards the top of the hill. Be ready too. If you go up towards the top of the hill, you got to be in good, not great shape, but you got to be in good shape, because it's a pretty fars away from the point you get to the parking all the way to the top of the hill where the tower is. If you're not in good shape, you're going to be a little out of breath. So take your time, walk up slowly. But either way, though, that's what this woman was doing. She was walking her dog out toward the top of the hill. She got the sense that there was someone else with her. And this was during the day, mind you, not at night. This was during the day. She got the sense that there was someone with her, even though she was alone. And that's when she started hearing chanting and voices coming from the forest around her. Now, at first, she dismissed them as just kids, which kind of makes sense. Again, this is a park. People, including parents, take their kids there to walk about, and then you can hear them, as I heard them whenever I was there at that location. But eventually she realized those were not kids. This was the chanting of something else differently. It turns out this was the chanting of Comanche Indians, because whenever she turned around, she realized that things suddenly, according to her, grew unnaturally dark. It was almost like there was a darkness that was suddenly surrounding that spot during the daytime again, no less. And then that's when she saw these two quote unquote strange looking men with painted faces who were now following her. Not only that, but at a certain point, they suddenly screamed and then started charging right at her. And so herself and her dog, they started running away, running as fast as they could back over to that parking lot, which is again right towards the bottom of the actual hill. They were still charging right at her, just trying to catch up to her as quickly as possible. And then when she turned at the last minute to face them on, that's when she saw that they were suddenly gone. There was no way that they could have just disappeared running into those forests surrounding it. I know because I've been there again myself. The area, the layout, if somebody did just suddenly run into the forest surrounding that area, you could still see them because it's dense, but it's not that dense. You could still see people running about, milling about, and so on. You could definitely hear them as well. But no, they were just gone. There was no trace of them whatsoever. Nothing visual, nothing auditory. They were just gone. And so she left. She realized that all of a sudden she had, or later on, she had an encounter with the actual spirits of the Comanche Indians there. And so she vowed never ever to come back again. So interesting stuff. So those are again some of the hauntings associated with the Comanche Lookout Tower, the ghost of Comanche Lookout Tower. What's interesting too is if you go there, I don't know how much the park frowns on this, so maybe not really a recommendation. But if you're a historian, you may come across some artifacts. I got a feeling that if this was a place, a location that, again, so many of those Comanche Indians were about for all those years, wouldn't they have stuff left behind, right? Wouldn't there be stuff buried somewhere and so on? So, as long as you find something there and just leave it there, you could at least essentially see some part of history. Who knows? You may come across an arrowhead or something else associated with the Comanche Indians, or maybe even some of those settlers or those military that were traveling back and forth as well. You might be able to come across them in the meantime. At least, if not the ghosts, some of the actual evidence as well too. But let me know what you guys and gals think with regards to this story, the ghosts of Comanche Lookout Tower. Interesting stuff, right? Again, you can visit the park, try to see if you can find those ghosts, maybe see if you can find some historical evidence. Just leave the evidence there, obviously. But otherwise, it's a nice location to visit on your own, if not for the history, but maybe even for the ghostly encounters. And then now you know the whole history associated with it when next time you travel there. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care.